Shiri, Ariel, and Kafir Bibas were taken from their home by Hamas amid its brutal terror attack against Israel. This mom and her precious babies were stolen from their home by Hamas. And we recently learned that these precious children, this baby and this toddler, were not just killed while in custody of Hamas. These babies, this baby and this toddler, were strangled to death by Hamas terrorists. Their mother killed. An unbelievably horrific act of terror. This is the evil that hate breeds. I am Laura Burns, head of terrorism research at George Washington University's Program on Extremism. With me today is Senior Research Fellow Jennifer Baker, continuing the historical account of the evolution of the Hamas terrorist organization and its infrastructure here in the United States. When we last left off, we had seen Musa Abu Marzouk deported to Jordan to join other Hamas leaders like Khalid Mashal, and he basically to continue leading the Hamas political bureau from their office in Amman, Jordan.
And then just after Marzouk was interviewed by the media and said that they wanted nothing but peace, Hamas conducted that devastating triple suicide bombing at the Ben Yehuda pedestrian mall in Jerusalem. And we spoke about that at great length.
Yes, we did. That terrible event. And, that was on September 4th of 1997. And on September 25th of 1997, Khalid Mashal was in Amman, Jordan, when two individuals believed to be Israeli Mossad agents administered a toxin via aerosol spray to Mashal in an attempt to kill him silently. The toxin was supposed to kill him within 48 hours, but there was a problem. One of Mashal's bodyguards witnessed the activities, and the would-be assassins were captured. However, Mashal was hospitalized and lay dying. Here to talk a bit more in detail about this and some related issues is Dr. Matthew Levitt, director of the Reinhardt Program on Counterterrorism at the Washington Institute, and author of books including Hamas, Politics, Charity, and Terrorism in the Service of Hamas, and his updated edition of his book on Hezbollah.
Khalid Mashal was born in the West Bank, but when he was a little boy, his father went to the Gulf for work, and then a few years later, the family joined after the 1967 war. So he grew up in Kuwait and was known within Hamas as the leader of the Kuwaitiyya, the Kuwait group. There's a little bit of tension between him and some of the other Hamas leaders, Musa Abu Marzouk and others who grew up in Gaza, lived in Gaza, as opposed to Mashal and his crew who kind of had their formative years outside of the West Bank or Gaza, outside of Palestine. But in 1990, because of the Iraq War, the Palestinians who supported Saddam get kicked out of Kuwait, and Khalid Mashal in 1990 is forced to leave Kuwait and goes to Amman and becomes one of the people in charge of foreign affairs for Hamas out of the Hamas headquarters office in Amman, Jordan. That's 1990. Over the next few years, he rises up the ranks, and it's really in 1995 when Musa Abu Marzouk is arrested here in the United States on his arrival back into the country that Mashal is promoted and is now the de facto leader of the political bureau, of the political committee. Over the next 2 years, Khalid Mashal, in this position as the chief Hamas politician, it turns out is also very, very actively overseeing Hamas military activity, Hamas terrorist activity in the West Bank. And when the U.S. government, when the Treasury Department designates him and a bunch of other Hamas leaders, it declassifies intelligence to that effect. And so it doesn't surprise that the Israelis have Khalid Mashal in their crosshairs, because he's not just a senior politician. He's not just one of the people who's negotiating the relationship and the funds and the weapons with Iran. He is trying to build Hamas's relationships with the Gulf states, and he is personally overseeing terrorist activity targeting Israel. And so the Israelis find themselves a couple of years later in 1997 with an opportunity. They have some agents. They have a chemical. They deploy these agents. They kind of bump into Khalid Mishal as he comes into his office and apply the chemical to his skin. And he gets very, very sick very, very quickly in hospital. But the agents are chased down the street by Khalid Mishal's Hamas bodyguards. And they take refuge in some in the embassy. Some are detained by the Jordanians. And you have this kind of diplomatic rift with a lot of time sensitivity because Khalid Mishal is dying. And while the Jordanians don't have a tremendous amount of love for Hamas, a significant portion of the country are ethnic Palestinians. They don't want that kind of domestic unrest that would come if a senior Palestinian, in this case Hamas leader, is killed on Jordanian soil. And so they make it very, very clear that the Israelis need to provide the antidote. If they don't provide the antidote, they will not get their agents back. This could lead to a disruption in the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty.
This set off a political firestorm between Jordan and Israel, but ultimately Mashal was given an antidote and survived the attempt.
Was there any reaction from the U.S.-based guys over this?
Yes, a couple of weeks after the failed attempt, an HLF fax was intercepted. And before we look at that, it's important to note that Khalid Mashal's nickname, remember the Abu name, we talked about that. His Abu name is Abu Walid or Abu al-Walid. And he is from the town of Silwad, which is in the West Bank. And we've talked about where the West Bank is. So anyway, this fax that was sent to the HLF stated that the citizens of the city of Silwad, that's Mashal's hometown, in the United States, offered their warmest congratulations to the righteous native, Mr. Khalid Mishal, Abu al-Walid, for his safety from the deplorable and failed assassination attempt, and a call upon the Arab and Muslim community in the United States to always stand by the side of our oppressed people in Palestine. And the executive director of the HLF, Shukri Abu Bakr, also had a call with his brother, Jamal, who was in Sudan at the time, about this issue. Shukri initially told his brother, "Thank God for the safety of your friend." Later in the call, Shukri asked his brother in a type of coded language if he had spoken with Khalid Mashal. The brother, Jamal, said he had spoken with him 10 hours before he got sick, and that Mashal was joking with him, saying, "Man, they are giving our friends hard times. Maybe they're going after me." And Jamal told Shukri that he told Khalid Mashal, "Your status is bigger than that." And Mashal said, "Man, you're jinxing me." And that conversation was at night, and the next morning is when, quote, malaria struck, which is code for Mashal being poisoned. Shukri Abu Bakr then told Jamal that they had tried to call Mashal but couldn't reach him. So they called Mashal's father and offered comfort to the family in the wake of the attempt.
Okay. So they knew him, Mashal, who was at the time the head of the Hamas political bureau in Amman with Marzouk. Is that right?
Yes. And not only did they know him, but his half-brother, again, was Mufid Abdul Qadir, one of the HLF fundraisers and the guy that sang in the IAP band.
Right. I remember that. What were the ramifications of the attempted assassinations? And I'm sure there were some.
Yes. Yeah. There was a profound event that happened as a result of this. Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, who had been imprisoned for years by the Israelis for all of those Hamas murders, as part of the negotiation after this failed attempt on Mashal, Yassin was released from prison.
And so what else comes out of this is that the Israelis end up releasing Sheikh Yassin. Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, the kind of founder and spiritual leader of Hamas, a paraplegic in a wheelchair, who'd been convicted of incitement and, again, being personally involved in dispatching people to carry out attacks, which gives Hamas a big shot in the arm.
So, Laura, did the HLF react to that?
Yes, Shukri Abu Bakr and Haitham Maghouri Both HLF officers had a quick call about the release of Yassin and other Hamas members.
Okay, we have not mentioned that name, Haitham Magari, before.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so he was a leader in the HLF by 1993 and attended the Philadelphia meeting. We could see a picture of him that was taken by the surveillance. We'll talk about him more later because he fled the United States and is a fugitive now, wanted for providing material support to Hamas. But nevertheless, at the time of this call, he was an officer along with Stu Grappenbacher at the HLF.
Okay, so let me get this right. At the time of the call, he was an HLF officer?
Yes.
Yeah. So Yassin was released from Israel custody. Did he go back to Gaza?
Yes, via Amman, Jordan, but he did go back to Gaza. And one of his first orders of business was to visit the Islamic University of Gaza. Remember, we talked about how that university was one of the HLF's very first recipients of funds. And the HLF, they supported the university. And then at the Philadelphia meeting, Hamas operative Muin Shabib talked about how the University of Gaza belonged to them.
All right. Yes, I remember that very well.
Well, there was a lot of support for Yassin after his release, and the Associated Press conducted an interview of a man named Sheikh Abdel Aziz Rantisi. He was one of the co-founders of Hamas. We've mentioned him before, along with Yassin, and he was also a prominent Hamas leader in Gaza. And the AP, the reporter asked him if the Palestinian Authority would go against Hamas, and he basically said no, the Palestinian Authority is not going to go against Hamas.
Palestinian Authority will be more wise in the future than before, and they found that cracking down on Hamas leads to nothing and just to weakening Hamas and the Palestinian population as a whole. And so I believe that there will be no answer from Palestinian Authority.
By the way, Rantisi is now deceased, but he was one of the 1992 deportees of Hamas leaders to Marj al-Zahor, Lebanon, that we saw in one of those early episodes. And you will recall that the HLF also supported those deportees.
Right, I recall that from one of our earliest episodes. So did Yassin become more moderate after he was released?
No, he continued to promote suicide bombings.
This small concrete mosque, the influence of the paralyzed Sheikh Yassin is spreading throughout Gaza and the West Bank, for his appeal is essentially a simple one. He is a man who continues to define the ultimate objective as the removal of the State of Israel. A man who is prepared to approve the sending of young people on suicide bomb attacks on the promise that they will go to heaven.
At the time of his release, there were some hopes that Sheikh Yassin might agree a truce. But speaking to me, he said there will be more suicide bombings.
These young men approach this act with strong belief and love for God, to defend their religion and their homeland. Nobody forces them to do it.
What did other Hamas leaders say about this?
Well, Khalid Mashal was interviewed by ITN at the time and reiterated Hamas's determination to destroy Israel. And we'll take a look at that.
Hamas leaders claim that there is no other way. Last month, Khalid Mashal survived an Israeli assassination attempt by chemical spray. He says that suicide bombings are an effective weapon in spite of the revulsion they provoke in the West.
If we just use words, Israel will not listen. When Israelis pay the price of occupation, then they will think about withdrawal.
Where does Israel have to withdraw to? To the sea?
Yes.
The strength of Hamas is in the young minds that it has entered. The movement is now present in schools and colleges throughout the Palestinian areas. The seeds of hate and the readiness to die for it have already been passed to the next generation.
Okay, so 1997 was very explosive. There were attempted assassination of Khalid Mashal that failed, the release of Hamas founder Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, and Yassin re-entered Gaza to lead Hamas and committed to the use of suicide bombings, noting that young men wanted to do these bombings.
Yes, and I think that statement goes back to the radicalization of people by Hamas. Hamas teaches children and the youth and anyone, frankly, who will listen that jihad for the sake of Allah and dying while killing Jews is an admirable thing that will earn them a key to heaven. So the fact that he's saying that these young men want to do this is part of them, consuming that radicalization.
That is a very powerful radicalization as well.
Yes, Hamas's power of radicalization is arguably what I would say the most lethal aspect of the terrorist organization.
So speaking of terrorist organizations, I think the U.S. had designated Hamas as a terrorist organization, as a foreign terrorist organization during this time period. Is that right?
Yes, they did, along with Hezbollah and other terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And the foreign terrorist organization designations were similar to the specially designated terrorist designations that we talked about in 1995. But what it did was it broadened the scope of laws that criminalized support for these terrorist organizations. This designation is one of the things the HLF knew was coming, and they feared it.
Were there further developments with the HLF?
Yes. So in December of 1997, the HLF Jerusalem office was closed by the Israeli government a second time.
Okay. Didn't they try to deny affiliation with the Jerusalem office a few months before this when it was shut down for the first time?
Yes. In a letter that they wrote to the Associated Press from June of 1997, again, so a few months before this, Shukri Abu Bakr claimed a media article about the HLF was false. And in the letter that he sent in response to it, he said, another erroneous statement is the HLF has an office in Jerusalem, which is shut down. The HLF has never had an office in Jerusalem. So they did deny it after that first closure. And now we have the second closure.
But here we have a seized document from the HLF office showing that was not the case. It shows that the office was opened in 1994.
Yes. And with this second closure, Shukri Abu Bakr placed a call with Haitham McGowery that we just talked about, another HLF officer who was at the Philadelphia meeting, and two other people where they planned to lie about the HLF having that Jerusalem office still. On the call, Shukri Abu Bakr inquired if they, meaning the Israeli government, took all the papers when they shut down the office. And the man on the phone said, yes, they did. Then Shukri turned to the topic of how to address members of the media if they began to call and said, quote, this is what we are going to say if they ask us.
So employing that war is deception mentality where the HLF and IAP leaders plan to lie to Americans. I see, that makes sense.
Yes, he said, quote, we are going to say you are registered under the Israeli law, a registered Palestinian organization. You have a board of directors and complete independence, and we have a relationship of cooperation with you because the media here is very keen to show that we have offices which are shut down. We tell them no, we don't have offices which are shut down. We don't have offices to begin with.
Did the HLF continue sending money to all the Hamas front organizations in Gaza like it had been before?
Yes, it did. And there was a focus on hospitals. Like, remember how they talked about the desire to be in control of hospitals in the 1993 Philadelphia meeting? And for example, they gave a loan, what they called a loan for $40,000 to the Al-Razi Hospital in Jenin during this time period. The agreement for the loan was between the HLF and a Jenin Zakat committee leader, Zaid Zarqana, who has been identified as a Hamas leader in Jenin.
Didn't we see Mun Shabib, the Hamas operative, at the Philadelphia meeting in 1993 mention that hospital?
Yes, he did. He said in Jenin, the Zakat committee there has built a hospital which is really ours for the Islamists. And then recently, if you look at open source reporting, Al-Razi Hospital, or one of the doctors at Al-Razi Hospital, a guy named Mustafa Amjad, was identified as a doctor who used to use his job to help suicide bombers infiltrate into Israel. And he was arrested in June of 2002 for basically delivering terrorists to Israel under the cover as a doctor.
Oh, really? Not long after the HLF gave them this money?
Right. Yes, that was, back in the, early 2000s.
I think I saw reports recently that the Al-Razi Hospital in Jenin was believed to have been used by Hamas after October 7, 2023.
Yes. News reports as recently as January 2025 reported on operations against the Al-Razi Hospital by the Israeli government, and Hamas slammed the Palestinian Authority in the media for participating in the raid. So it looked like it was a joint raid between the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority against Hamas using that hospital.
Wow, that is very interesting. Okay, so back to the time period where we were finishing up in 1997. What were the front organizations here doing during the late 1990s?
Well, business as usual. They were still doing their thing, only with added operational security and efforts to conceal their motives and agendas from the American public. The HLF and IAP continued along just as the UASR did, despite all the heat they were getting in the media.
What about CAIR?
Well, they continued to produce their annual report documenting anti-Muslim bias in daily life. Omar Ahmad, the speaker at the Philadelphia meeting, continued to act as chairman of the board. And they continued to build support for their organization that they were holding out as a leader in defending Muslim civil rights in the United States. Their 1999 report focused heavily on the need for religious accommodations for Muslims in public schools, and also reported that Milwaukee Muslim community members had held a press conference to express concern over what they called intimidating visits by the FBI or by FBI agents of Muslims who felt their constitutionally protected speech was the reason that they were approached, speech relating to the Palestinian cause. Some reporting indicated Omar Ahmad made a speech in November of 1999 where he justified the use of suicide bombers by saying they killed themselves for Islam. But I've never seen that video. That's just in reporting.
Okay. Did the HLF and CAIR maintain their relationship?
Yes. Omar Ahmad, whose nickname was Omar Yahya, the former leader of the IAP, who spoke at the Philadelphia meeting and co-founded CAIR and was the chairman of the board of CAIR, spoke with the HLF leader Sheikh Abu Bakr in May of 99 about the HLF's fundraising activities and which speakers should be credited with which events. Now, keep in mind, Omar Ahmad allegedly had no official role in the HLF, but this call demonstrates a different dynamic between those individuals and organizations. During the call, static on the phone occurred, and Omar Ahmad joked that the phone was tapped. They joked that the FBI's equipment was old, and Omar Ahmad said to tell them to change it, and they laughed about it.
So they were discussing HLF business. But Omar Ahmad was the chairman of the board of CAIR at the time, right?
Correct. Yes. And they agreed how much they would pay the HLF chairman of the board, Mohammed El-Mazain, for his fundraising activities. So it was an agreement on salary, basically. On another occasion, same year, 1999, Omar Ahmad told Haytham McGowery of the HLF to distribute $50,000 to an unnamed recipient. Haytham was not happy about it because there wasn't apparent documentation to support it, and the recipient had jumped in line in front of others. But Omar Ahmad had what appeared to be the final say in that distribution of $50,000.
So again, Omar Ahmad, the chairman of the board for CAIR, an ostensibly separate Muslim advocacy group, a civil rights group that was in reality founded in a Hamas conspiratorial meeting in 1993 in Philadelphia, is directing the expenditures of a purported independent 5013C charitable organization, the HLF.
Yes, an organization that we'll find out later was designated as a Hamas front organization, but it demonstrates the true relationships between the organizations and the individuals in this infrastructure.
So Laura, were there developments with Hamas overseas?
Yes, so now we've gone on to 1999, and there were some major developments. As we already discussed, Hamas leaders Khalid Mashal and Musa Abu Marzouk, along with a man named Ibrahim Gosha that we talked about earlier when Marzouk was in custody in New York. Gosha had written a letter to congressional members demanding that Marzouk be released. So all of those guys were operating the Hamas Political Bureau headquarters in Amman, Jordan in 1999. Okay. But in late August, early September 1999, Jordan, the country, had become increasingly concerned about those guys' activities in support of Hamas's military training and operation. They weren't supposed to be doing that.
So all of this really kind of elevates Khalid Mishal. He now has survived an Israeli assassination attempt. He's described sometimes as the living martyr because he was so close to death. But for Hamas, they kind of misplayed and misunderstood the Jordanian role in saving his life. They understood this as the Jordanians kind of falling in line with Hamas's view of the world. They kind of understood that this event on Jordanian soil convinced the Jordanians of the evil of the Israelis, of the righteousness of Hamas. And Hamas starts pretty quickly after this incident to become much more aggressive in their activities in Jordan, not just using Jordan as a place for their headquarters activities, but much more aggressively using Jordan as a place through which to smuggle weapons into the West Bank. Jordanian intelligence collects information that they say points to Hamas collecting weapons in Jordan, potentially for use against Jordan. And that, of course, is the Jordanian red line. In general, anybody doing things to threaten the kingdom, and in particular, the prospect of Palestinians, again, who make up a huge percentage of the population, maybe trying to change the balance of power and challenge the monarchy. And so in 1999, the Jordanians shut down the Hamas office in Jordan. This is not just an office. This is their headquarters. Khalid Mishal, Musa Abu Marzouk, and some others were actually out of the country. They were in the Gulf at the time. And a little while later, they decided to try and challenge the issue, force the matter, and get on a plane going back to Jordan. And they're arrested on arrival, detained for a little bit, and then deported.
Marzouk ultimately took up residence in Syria, and Mashal and Gosha were asked to leave Jordan and to not return. Mashal joined Marzouk in Damascus, Syria, where they established a new Hamas Political Bureau headquarters.
So then operations continued, led by the Political Bureau in Syria.
Yes, it did. And in the year 2000, things got a lot worse.